Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Make it legendary. I'm Jamie. That's Dave. That's Heath. We're talking about our wide receiver rankings for week number 9. Let's waste no time. Let's show you the list 1 through 12 of the number 1 wide receivers. And there's a name that we used to see on this list that we may not see this particular week, and that's Nico Collins, coming back from his 1-game absence with a concussion. So, Heath, when you look at Collins, he hasn't had the season that we hoped for, taking on a really good Broncos defense, but there may not be Patrick Surtain. At least that's the expectation as of now. So what do we think of Collins in this week's game?
I think you view him as a number 2 wide receiver. They probably don't really concern with injury risk. There's concern with whether they can protect the quarterback and whether he can be upright long enough for Collins to get into his routes. So view him as a number 2, recognize he still has top 12 upside, and hope we get that so we can have more optimism moving forward.
You can show the list 13 through 24, and we'll see where Collins pops up. But I want to ask you about a guy that's on this list as well, though, Dave, and that's Justin Jefferson, because quarterback change again. So we started the season with J.J. McCarthy. He's actually the only quarterback to get Jefferson into the end zone. But this is not an easy matchup against Detroit. At least that's what we thought it would be in the preseason, but not so much right now. Is Jefferson still just a set it and forget it, or could there be some guys you might be starting over?
I think if you're loaded at wide receiver, you might be able to get away from Justin Jefferson. I am worried about how he'll do with J.J. McCarthy under center. Heath talked about the pace of play that Minnesota is expected to go with on one of our earlier programs. And the offensive line is a huge concern. I have the exact same concerns for the Vikings as I do for the Texans. The pass rush of the Lions coming at them, if they've got backup tackles, that's a bad thing for J.J. McCarthy. I've got Jefferson as a number 2 wide receiver this week, obviously has the upside to be the best receiver in fantasy football. I understand it's difficult to sit a guy like that, but man, I am very concerned about how this Vikings offense will operate. At least you should expect a decent amount of passing from them, because I think they'll play from behind. So maybe in the second half there'll be more opportunities and it'll be easier for McCarthy to operate in that situation.
Impacts Jordan Addison as well, as you'll see him on the next list of 25 through 36. And a couple guys that we're going to talk about now are both receivers for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were on a bye in Week 8. They come back in Week 9. We got the report during their bye week that the Jaguars, at least from the beat writers, they're trying to maybe give Travis Hunter a little bit more work. Brian Thomas trying to work through that shoulder injury. He's been in practice in a harness. So, Heath, I'll start with you with Hunter. Dave, you can follow with Brian Thomas. So, are we looking at a guy that had over 20 targets in his last 2 games, finally had that breakout game against the Rams in Week 7 to be that guy rest of season? Or, Dave, do we get the guy that we saw coming off the bye in Jacksonville last year, which was Brian Thomas, close the season on a tear? Which of the Jaguars receivers are we going to see, and which is going to be better than the next?
Right now I've got Thomas ranked at 30 and Hunter ranked at 31. And you talk about like beat writer reports we're getting out of Jacksonville, and we've heard so much over the last 6 months about how Travis Hunter was going to be used. And it's just gone all over the place. Like he had 21 targets the last 2 weeks, and that makes you, and 100 yards in his most recent game, that makes you want to rank him as a top 24 guy. He also had 14 targets the first 2 weeks and then played 75% at corner for a couple of weeks. And so it's so hard to trust anything in Jacksonville. I think Trevor Lawrence has actually played better than what the statistics look like. He has the most dropped passes in the NFL. I think the best way to view both of these receivers, and Dave may think different, is they are extreme boom-bust number 3 wide receivers. They could be top 12 guys like Hunter was the last time he played. Thomas still could be as well. They could be guys you want to sit.
I wonder if that game against the Rams that you referenced, Jamie, he had 11 targets in the second half. Remember, they were getting blown out in that game. I wonder if that was the litmus test to see what the offense would look like and how comfortable Trevor would be with Travis Hunter. And he looked pretty comfortable with Travis Hunter. And Heath referenced the drops that Trevor Lawrence has dealt with. A lot of them have come from Brian Thomas Jr., and Brian Thomas Jr. is banged up. You talked about that. I'm like the X-Files. I want to believe in Brian Thomas Jr., but it's been half a season already. He's had 1 great game. I think they make the switch to Travis Hunter, and in PPR leagues, I feel better about him than I do Brian Thomas Jr. coming out of the bye.
I'm still going to start Thomas over Hunter, just with the hope that he's getting back to being, because we saw some flashes prior. Yes, he only had 1 great game, but we saw some moments there. But I think you said this earlier, that maybe both guys live up to the expectations and we start to see the best of Trevor Lawrence. coming off their bye week. And this could be one of those games where if the Raiders offense does show up, we get maybe a shootout because we've seen some holes in this Jacksonville secondary. So Geno Smith getting Brock Bowers back, maybe we see some fireworks on both sides. For me, I'm a little concerned about Debo Samuel, not so much the setup, because the setup is great without Terry McLaurin, Jaden Daniels back.
Sure.
This has been when he's been at his best. However, he is facing a very tough matchup against the Seahawks defense. We've seen him sort of struggle through his heel injury. So I think a number 2 receiver, I know Dave, you're a little bit lower on him, but I think most people probably still start him in 2 receiver leagues with the hope of Deebo carrying the load with Jaden Daniels back there. But I can certainly understand some trepidation based on what we've seen from him in the last month. So get back to being that type of guy. And for what it's worth, Seattle has given up some big numbers to number 1 wide receiver, so hopefully that's the case in this matchup. Let's talk about some wide receivers to start. So, Heath, you got an interesting name on here, and that's Khalil Shakir. We usually think of him more as a number 3 wide receiver. You have him as a top 24 guy this week.
Yeah, he's been pretty clearly the number 1 wide receiver, especially the last month for Josh Allen. 26.7% target share in the Bills' last 4 games, leads the team with a 21% target share on the year. And I understand why a lot of people don't know that, because we have too many games where Josh Allen throws the ball 27 times. They run 55 plays, and you don't really notice who the number 1 wide receiver is. I do not believe this is going to be one of those games. This should be a game where Allen lets loose, throws 35-plus times, and we see 7, 8, maybe even 9 targets from Khalil Shakir. He's a top 20 wide receiver for me.
He's got a higher target per route run rate versus zone coverage than man, and I know that the Chiefs have played a lot of man coverage this year. They typically play zone, at least recently in the matchups against Buffalo. They play a little bit more zone. That opens things up for Shakir.
6 catches for 80 yards in their most recent meeting going back to last year. So we'll see if that type of production happens. We'll be thrilled about that for Shakir, and he has scored a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 games as well. Let's talk about the Chargers wide receivers, because Keenan Allen's a start for me and Quentin Johnston's a sit for you. So we've kind of gone through this a lot in some of our shows this week of somebody's going to get left out. And Keenan Allen's been left out 3 of the last 4 games. It's been unfortunate because the targets have still been there for him. But we've seen Oronde Gadsden. We saw at the start of this, it was still Quentin Johnston. Obviously, Ladd McConkey's been getting going lately. And this feels like a game clearly where they're going to run the ball with a lot of success. So will there be enough volume for these guys to succeed? I'm just going to trust that Keenan Allen will still be 7+ targets. And that's kind of been a safe number for receivers against the Titans. 5 wide receivers have had at least 7 targets or more against this defense. They've all scored 13.9 PPR points or more, so hopefully he can be in that range. Be happy about him as a number 2 wide receiver. But Quentin Johnston, clearly the last 2 weeks he's been a disappearing act, and it's just an easy guy, I think, at this point for you to get away from.
It's funny, he's been a disappearing act for fantasy managers, but for the Chargers, they've loved what he's doing because he's taking double teams down the field and opening things up underneath for Ladd McConkey, for Keenan Allen, for Oronde Gadsden, even Kamani Vidal. So he's doing his role very well. I don't know if they need him this week to do anything more than that. And could they take a couple of deep shots? Absolutely. You look at this Titans defense. It's terrible. Their pass rush is banged up. They just traded away one of their best cornerbacks. But I don't know if he's going to get the same type of opportunities. You talked about 7 targets for Keenan Allen. I don't think we're going to see even 4 targets for Quentin Johnston. So boom, bust, flex for me.
I just wonder, because I think you're right. Like, they're happy with what he's doing. Yeah. And you want to reward a guy. Well, why not do that in a game like this where you're going to win by 2 or 3 scores anyways, and they don't cover anybody? He's going to be running. There were times last week. They might. There were times last week where Quentin Johnston, you can see it on the film, like he's throwing to other guys, never looks to this side of the field, and Quentin Johnston doesn't have anybody within 10 yards of him. It's not like he's not still getting open, and he is the type of guy who can go score 16 fantasy points on 4 targets. We saw that was frustrating at times last year, where he just goes and has a 75-yard touchdown, and all of a sudden you've got your day. So I don't want to start Quentin Johnston, but I do think if in a 3 wide receiver league, it's not a bad guy to have in that spot.
That's fair.
He could put up a big number on a small number of targets.
Can win you your league for sure, and we'll see if Quentin Johnston gets the job done. But again, a lot of mouths to feed for this Chargers offense. You said it earlier today. Just understand, start them all. Someone will disappoint you, but at some point they're going to have a lot of big games, and we've seen it with pockets, with Allen, with McConkey, with Gadsden, and Johnston.
Great schedule moving forward, too. Steelers and the Jaguars after this week.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back and get into the tight ends you need to start, the tight ends you need to sit, and our rankings at the position that's next here on Fantasy Football Today.